My name is Alex Paris. I'm part of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub team. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone here in the Innovation Hub Pavilion at COP28, and also to welcome everybody following us online. So our first session of the day is called Innovative Renewables for Energy Security, Alternative Sources of Flexible Low-Carbon Energy to Meet Global Electricity Demand. And who is going to be the facilitator and the moderator of this session is Mr. Peter Schreling from Future Clean Tech Architects. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session at the UN Global Innovation Hub. Maybe there's still a handheld mic I could get, but otherwise I'll just be using this one. It's a pleasure welcoming you, more people pouring in. We want to talk about innovative renewables today. And that is just being handed a mic, thank you. Maybe I use this one, that's easier, you can hear me better. So we want to talk about highly innovative renewables. And for this, we have established, we were lucky to win a very suitable panel with experts from various walks of life, professional backgrounds, who deal with questions on innovation and questions on renewables from various perspectives. But before we come to them and before we ask them on stage, we would like to show you why we need innovative renewables. So why this panel? Why have we focused on this? Future Clean Tech Architects is a think tank dedicated to the hardest to abate sectors, so to the most difficult problems in the energy transition. And why are innovative renewables a part of this? You all know solar and wind. You know that the increase of solar and wind is growing. You see it here on the slide. And that as we need to phase out fossil fuels, which you can see at the bottom of the slide, until 2050, the share of intermittent renewables, the share of intermittent sources of electricity will grow. And the predictions we're using here, which is based on an IEA study, you can see a large share of solar and wind, which is, of course, requiring a different setup of the electricity market and of the flexibility we need, because we cannot solve everything by supply following applications. Sometimes we need electricity at a certain time of the day, and so the large share of intermittent renewables is a challenge in that context. So what we're looking at is we need an increased supply of clean power for these innovative, so we need innovative renewables for that, and it will have a strong positive impact on energy security because you can see already in discussions now the share to which the supply chain materials that are needed for various sources of electricity production just influence the vulnerability of states, of regions, of groups of states to get reliable electricity supply. So what do we mean when we talk innovative renewables? We've collected a couple of examples. They all have in common, at least the versions we are talking about, that they are relatively early stage. We speak of technology readiness levels, TRLs. You might have heard it before in your work. And just walking you through some of these technologies. You can see on the left-hand solar, concentrated solar power. You might say, oh, CSP, we've heard that, we know it, it's established, it's working in some applications, yes, but the range could be broadly expanded. We have on the panel somebody today with a very interesting, very unusual type of generation technology, space-based solar. Now this is really far out, not just in a geographical sense, but it's very far out in terms of technology development, in terms of TRL, very early stage, but a very interesting approach. Airborne wind, you know conventional wind turbines. There are also different systems, airborne wind, where you have kites, geothermal, ocean energy, all bring certain advantages, certain disadvantages. We'll soon be releasing a fact sheet on this and more publications, what they could do to provide the flexibility in the energy system that we will need with the increasing share of intermittent renewables. So, what's the downside? What's the challenge? You could say, yeah, let's scale them, let's develop them, let's scale them. But there's a couple of particularities about these types of systems, and similar aspects applied for the conventional mainstream renewables you all know. If you go back 30 years, 40 years and look at photovoltaics or look at wind power, it was a whole different story. Innovative renewables are at early stages of commercializations. That's thought of the megawatt that are being installed already across the globe. It's just a small capacity, and there's not a big learning curve yet. There needs to be dedicated support. They don't develop by themselves. None of the major electricity or energy technologies have in the past. It's always been political support. It's always been a framework to make them grow, a framework to develop them on a long-term basis. And finally, there's historical examples of that these methods work. And just to show you the imbalance, and it's not even proportionate in terms of the size, but what we like to do is sometimes put these contexts into visuals, is the imbalance between the attention and the funding and investment the established renewables get. We have the example of the wind industry and the solar industry with the respective investments in the billions, as you can see. And at the same time, you see the very low relative investment for geothermal, for ocean energy, and other types of energy systems, immature energy systems. Again, what would be the advantage if we manage to develop over certainly decades or many years those type of innovative renewables that don't go with the volatility and with the fluctuation of the mainstream renewables. We've visualized here, just in a schematic way, if you have what in Germany, we're located in Germany, or head office is in Germany, we call it Dunkelflaute. You might have heard the term. This is supposed to describe a situation where the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. So basically we would need to cover any of that either with conventional technologies or with storage. This is what's supposed to be shown in this gap in electricity production in the end. If we were to scale and develop some of these not as intermittent renewables, it would reduce the requirement for storage and give us more flexibility, would reduce the vulnerability, so come with a lot of advantages for the energy system. Please come in, everyone. It's early in the morning, we know, and we're a little hidden with this pavilion, but it's an important topic. And I would like to show to you, before we then come to the panel in a minute, some lessons learned from solar PV. And we've compiled this summary on it, and we're also happy to provide the slides, by the way, in the end. We've provided this overview, or we've collected the number of, or the sort of the learning curve, which you can see here at the bottom, of solar PV, so photovoltaics power, how the LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, decreased over time, with which number of projects ever since the invention of the solar PV cell in the 1950s, and how, if you follow the yellow line at the bottom, is the total installed capacity, how only at a very late stage, after a lot of investments over a long time, installed capacity then really took off and is now the most probably meaningful generation technology and the preferred generation technology there is across the globe. Now you can't compare them one by one, all of them, because there's things that these technologies do not have in common with solar PV we'll be talking about in a minute, but still it shows the development pathway. Historically, we managed to bring, once the accumulated installation grew to a certain level and investment reached a certain level, all these technologies went down on the learning curve. We'd like to show one example from Europe of how these type of technologies can be support it very innovatively and boldly. And this is the revision of the Renewables Energy Directive that was passed in June of this year. It's the third one. It goes back to 2009. It's abbreviated RED, or the acronym is RED, Renewables Energy Directive. And I would like to play a statement of the rapporteur, the policymaker in charge of coordinating this directive and getting its revision through. And I'd like you to listen. It's a, I think, 2.5-minute statement. It's recorded in the parliament. And Mr. Pieper, his name is Dr. Markus Pieper, he's part of the EPP, is summarizing which components they've put into this law. And there's one particular component I'd like you to draw your attention to, which is a quota on these innovative type of renewables. So I would appreciate if I could ask the team to play the movie. Alex will be so kind to bring it on the screen. Thank you very much. And then over to the panel, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm happy to join you here at the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, the very forum that is intended to promote the transfer of innovation across countries and continents. It is evident that our reliance on conventional solutions, particularly solar and wind, must be supplemented by innovative low-carbon energy sources. We need innovations in renewable energy production to push us forward to a cleaner and more resilient energy future. Europe and Germany recognize the importance of renewable energy for climate protection earlier than others. Nevertheless, we in Europe have been losing speed. Why? Complicated, long-lasting permitting procedures are one reason. Even more important, our funding without market economy. With guaranteed feed-in tariffs for over 20 years, even for technically outdated solar collectors, there is a lack of pressure to innovate in many EU countries. But we have learned our lessons. In September, the European Parliament adopted the new Renewable Energy Directive, the so-called RED III. This law is proof that Brussels can be unbureaucratic, even pragmatic. Not only does it increase the European 2030 target for final energy consumption from 30% to 45%, but also the RED III says how this can be achieved more cost-effectively and with less regulation. Firstly, the expansion of renewables is now classified as an overriding public interest until climate neutrality is achieved. This guarantees faster approval procedures for all renewable energy installations and their infrastructures. The wonderful term positive silence also ensures that planning applications are automatically approved if there is no feedback within 16 months. Secondly, the law is open to all technologies. The focus is on wind power and photovoltaics, but also biomass, hydropower, geothermal energy and tidal streams. The third door opener is a realization that imports are crucial for renewables. Heat pumps, electric cars and hydrogen in industry will require at least 5 times more green electricity to achieve climate neutrality. Europe will have to import 50 to 70% of this. For this reason, we give the member states the obligation to include import strategies for green energy and hydrogen in their national energy plans. Finally, last but not least, the Renewable Energy Directive is an accelerator for innovation, the key to the competitiveness of renewable energies. Member states are required to plan 5% of the annual expansion quotas beyond the state of the art. Tendered and market premiums for wind, solar and biomass, pilot projects for floating solar cells, wind kites, river power plants, solar roads and hydropower plants using energy from ocean waves and so on and so on. Nothing is impossible and almost everything has a future. The new EU directive gives every relevant technology the right to be researched. Europe now stretches out its hands to other regions of the world and invite you to exchange ideas on innovation, like today, hosts from Germany, future cleantech architects, who have also provided input in the innovative elements of the RED 3. Knowledge exchange inspires business innovation by facilitating the sharing of ideas, expertise, and best practices. Such collaboration accelerates problem solving, enables cross-industry learning, and sparks new approaches, ultimately driving growth, competitiveness, and long-term success. Thank you very much and all the best for your innovations, Markus Pieper.
Thank you for playing the video. Thank you for the applause. Now, why do we focus on these things? We try to bring lessons learned across. So things, innovative elements, as in the European law, can of course be adopted in other parts of the world as well, and vice versa. So this is what COP is about. This is also what we're trying to summarize and put together after COP. So, without further ado, we've heard Dr. Markus Pieper. I'd like to ask on stage Elena Oschanik, who is, I have to get the exact title, Elena, and please give her a warm applause. She's the senior policy advisor, thank you, on climate and sustainability of the presidential administration of Romania. And she used to be with IRENA before, which is how we know. Thank you very much for being with us today. We've got San Yang Su of UNIDO, UN Industrial Development Organization. She's a clean tech expert at the Climate Technologies Innovation Unit and the Division of Decarbonization and Sustainable Energy, and doing a lot of work on scaling clean tech and working on clean tech. We have Johanna Schiele. Thank you for being with us again, Johanna. She is Policy Officer at the EU Innovation Fund, DG Klima at the European Commission. And last but not least, we have Martin Heuer, who's Senior Partner with Roland Berger and has worked extensively with the European Space Administration to drive and scale space-based solar power. And I will join all you now. It's a pleasure having you. Thank you very much. So, you've heard, we've sort of seen, and the audience have seen, we've heard an overview of how immature some of these technologies still are. You've seen activities at the European level, and actually I'd like to ask the first question to Johanna right away, because you're working on a lot of the structures. You've worked for the Innovation Fund, you've been working on hydrogen banks, and all these projects. What is there and what is still missing from your perspective on driving such immature systems to the mass market?
Thanks very much, Peter. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So I work for the European Commission for DG Climate Action. DG Klima runs the European Emissions Trading System, which is the carbon pricing system in Europe. And the big upside of having carbon pricing is that it generates revenue for governments. So the carbon pricing system, if it was a bank, would actually be the biggest bank in Europe. And part of the revenues from the ETS flow back into several funds that can invest in clean technologies in Europe. So what we have is quite a good landscape in terms of financial support from very early stage research with the Horizon Europe program, to startup finance with the EIT, EIC programs, to then commercial scale rollout with the Innovation Fund, which is funded from the ETS. I think it's really important to have an integrated chain of support from the lab and the universities to really commercial scale rollout, because when supporting innovative technologies, we always have to keep in mind at some point that stuff has got to be cheap enough to be picked up by the market, because you cannot keep subsidizing any technology forever. But that said, without the early support, without the support for research and demonstrators, I think it's very hard to de-risk technologies to get any private finance in. So I think today we should focus a lot on the research funding, and this is maybe where there's a bit of a gap in Europe as well, because Horizon Europe is focusing a lot on universities and really very early stage technology developments, whereas the Innovation Fund is on the very commercial large-scale rollout, and in the middle we do have a bit of a gap, so I think that's where we're lacking a program.
Just maybe a quick follow-up question. Since you've partly been educated in the US, as I know. What is the US? What are other regions maybe doing still doing better in this sense?
Incubators.
Incubators.
So we don't have very large, very market plugged in incubators in Europe. We have a couple, obviously. Munich is really big, Barcelona is big. But in terms of the one thing we could take from the US would be more and better funded incubators.
Thank you so much. Maybe Sanyang, if I may ask you, because you're working basically across continents, you're working with a lot of governments, trying to scale clean tech, co-running the innovation program. What do you consider to be best practices on this particular perspective? So Johanna just mentioned we still lack the incubator role, for example, in Europe. Which other, say, best practices do you see across the globe in your work?
Thank you very much, Peter. Good morning, everyone. My name is Han Yang. I'm with UNIDO, and one of the initiatives that we lead is providing business acceleration services to clean tech innovations. And our focus is the Global South. So currently, we have a network of 16 countries. In each of these countries, we run a clean tech business accelerator. And I mean, we can debate, whether it's an incubator or an accelerator, but essentially what we do is we try and provide business acceleration services that are targeted for clean tech solutions, which are very different from these IT software types of acceleration services. So it's been about 10 years since we started this program. And when we first started, we took the model of the Silicon Valley, where you have incubators and accelerators. You bring in a lot of innovative entrepreneurial people, bring them into the program, and they receive coaching and mentoring from the experts in that space who have the same experience, so they do not repeat the failures, and they can learn from the lessons already learned by the previous generation. So we are continuing with that model through the business acceleration services that we provide. In many of these countries, the efforts that we are making, it is one of the first initiatives that exist in the country, especially in the clean tech sector. And one of our difficulties then is to make sure that we have a pool of mentors and coaches that are able to provide the very clean tech specific challenges that these innovators and entrepreneurs will face. Because actually these are the first generation entrepreneurs that are entering into this market, and you can imagine the hurdle and the barriers that they face. So in often cases, it's rather than the mentors and coaches already having the experience to pass on to the next generation, they are working together. They are going through the hurdle and the barriers together, and they're holding their hands. So that's one of the initiatives that we are working on.
Sorry to the kind tech team. Maybe you can have another mic here. We're still handing too many around. Oh yeah, there's one more. Great. Quick follow-up also to you, Sanyang.
Sure.
So, what would you say? What is working? What would make your work in scaling these things there easier? Can you think of any? If you think of the 5% quota or other initiatives that mandate to governments or mandate to regions and nations to dedicate resources to this, can you think of anything else that you've come across that works very effectively?
I would say in many of these countries, the ecosystem is still developing. So so on the one hand, on one side of the coin, we work directly with these innovators, entrepreneurs. On the other hand, we do what we call ecosystem strengthening, where we work with the governments to set clear signals to the market. So for our acceleration program at the moment is very supply driven. So we look at the available innovations that exist, and then we source them into the accelerator based on their impact potential. But I think what could enhance our services is if we also have clear signals from the market, which is coming from government's policy targets that say these are the types of technologies that the market will likely absorb in the near future. And that would help us discern which are the solutions that we should prioritize and accelerating, and it would also give signal to the researchers and the innovators to see what are the challenges that they should tackle. So definitely policy is very important, and we do a lot of ecosystem building services, and that requires a policy advice. But another component that we've realized recently is the linkages between ecosystem actors. So it's good to have strong institutions in different areas of the ecosystem, but unless they are very well connected, the continuum has certain gaps, and those are then the pitfalls that the entrepreneurs experience, which discourage them, that slow down the progress.
Something we've also discussed in Vienna at the Energy Forum. I remember the ecosystem is very important. So we take from Johanna, we've got the incubators, which are highly important, and the way, for example, benchmarks in the US or benchmark applications do this. We hear the ecosystems and the funding programs also in developing countries or emerging economies. I'd like to come to Romania for a second. We've got Elena here, thank you so much. Now you bring the perspective of both worlds, basically. Knowing how techs develop, knowing how especially renewables have learned and sort of developed at IRENA in the past, and now you're looking at one country, advising the president on how to develop the Romanian systems. What do you consider promising approaches, policy approaches to drive these earlier stage techs?
Thank you very much. I think I'm lucky enough to have seen both the private sector, the international organizations sector, indeed working on innovation with IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and also on the policy side of things. So, and I think that brings some value. Indeed, you might see Romania emerging as a leader, and there have been many things happening in the past 2-3 years. And let me explain you a little bit why I'm saying that. So I think we also need to innovate in governance, in the way we develop policies, and in regulatory practices. And I'm going to give you 2 examples from Romania. The president of Romania, Klaus Iohannis, has established about 3 years ago for the first time a climate and sustainability department, what I am part of. In addition to that, he has initiated working groups, expert working groups, right, bringing the knowledge, the expertise that is out there from Romanian people, both from the country but also from outside the country, in order to come together and make policy recommendations, evidence-based policy recommendations. And this is a novelty. This is something new. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is that in parallel, under the government, under the Prime Minister, we have what we call an interministerial committee on climate change. And if you look at Romania and you seek to see if there's any ministry of the energy transition or climate change, you won't find that, because the ministries in Romania, under the Romanian government, they meet in this committee. And I think that's also a novelty in governance, because it helps us understand the challenges that the various ministries are facing. So we have, of course, the Ministry of Environment, where usually you would have climate change policies and, for example, the funds that are coming from the EU ETS, and the administrations that are working under that ministry historically would be there. But the funds are not only there, they're also under the Ministry of Energy. We have the Ministry of Economy, we have Transport, we have the buildings under the Ministry of Development, and so on and so forth. And having this sort of committee that meets regularly, that's an innovation in itself. This is a whole of government approach. And we know that in the recent Romanian climate and development report, the World Bank has praised us for this innovation. So I think we need to make sure that the citizens are aware of the challenge, the opportunities, when it comes to climate change, mitigation and adaptation, but we also need to be aware what the businesses are doing, and we need to engage them in this process, but at the same time, the policymakers and the government and all the administration underneath, they also need to be aware about what's happening in terms of innovation in the business sector. So I think this dialogue is key across multiple sectors and across multiple institutions.
Do you see, if I may ask, because we had the discussion in Germany as well on a better, improved interministerial collaboration, like closer coordination, better use of resources, also changes between the units. Same for the Commission, of course, in Europe. But did you see a quality change? So has this really brought about?
Yes, totally. So I'm bringing these examples because indeed, after many conversations also with the World Bank, like having an external entity looking at what we have been doing, indeed, I see this as bringing a lot of value, because we need to also socialize among ourselves and understand what is happening. And sometimes, you know, we all have our very busy agendas and our objectives to meet, but we may not always understand the challenges in different institutions. And having this committee meeting regularly at the policy making level, so you have to imagine that this committee is chaired by the Prime Minister, and we have ministers represented. But at the same time, so we do have the political layer, but we also have the technical, the expertise layer. So we meet together about once a month, sometimes even more often. And I may give you one example. One big achievement, actually from last week, for the first time we do have a long-term strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with very ambitious targets by 2050. And I think this big achievement is part of that process because it took a lot of time. It was not without challenges, but having all relevant ministries on board, not just environment, not just energy, but also economy, also transport, also buildings, helped indeed facilitate this process and agree that Romania will be carbon neutral by 2050 with very ambitious renewable targets, so over 80% in the electricity sector.
Wow. Okay. Before we come to the private sector, and Martin has been waiting so patiently. Johanna, sorry, I'd like to, listening to what we just heard on the ecosystems, on the interministerial collaboration and so forth, does this ring a bell at the European level somehow? Do you see parallels? And I see you smiling. Please only say what you're entitled to say, or allowed to say, but yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It does ring true. I think also in the German context, that's very true. So as a German person, some people might have read the news about how many people are attending COP. It's a ridiculously high number. It's way too many people traveling here because every ministry gets their quota to send people. I think the UK is a very good example of positive governance as well with the low carbons LCCC, which is running all of the funding programs like the CFD scheme in the UK, but then also an independent advisory committee that's not advising the government in terms of the exact steps that it has to take, but it's rather checking every year, are the government policies in place enough to reach the targets that were voted in place by the parliament? So it's more of a governance responsibility check rather than micromanagement. This or that policy has to be implemented, for which I think democratic legitimacy would be difficult for such a committee. And then lastly, on the commission, I think what's been really powerful is to have Franz Timmermans as quite a spearhead figure who was collecting efforts in the role of the EVP. And I think that was a good innovation to create these new EVP roles under the president of the commission. Now we have two commissioners again for climate and for climate action and the overall EVP for the Green Deal. So let's see how the cooperation works.
Thank you. If you could name, and also asking Elena, basically both of you, because I see we have people from other ministries here, we have people from other UN organizations here. If you could name 3 steps that have made the work not of yourself only, but of the ministries, of the coordinating bodies more efficient, or 1 or 2 steps. What comes to your mind besides, Elena, what you've mentioned, the coordination committee that's also, you know, led by the president or somebody who's really in charge on this. But can you think of any other steps that bring big value in short time?
I think, yes. I think, again, I've seen how organizations like yours or international organizations are working, and I think what really helps speed up things is getting the data and the facts and the innovation right. Having those small summaries for policymakers that are easy to digest in a very short time. So policy recommendations based on evidence and that have best practices. I think that brings a lot to the table in the discussion, because sometimes we're wondering, okay, we understand we have an issue here, there's a challenge, we want to address it, there is political will, but the question is then, what's the solution? Where do we find those solutions? Is there any catalog, you know, is there any fairy, and I know this question will pop up later, which we can just call to help us solve a problem. So I think there is a lot of value in international cooperation, in events like this one, in reports that are easy to be digested by policymakers in a very short time. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, maybe to add one point, I think very good and easily available modeling and scenario modeling has been super helpful on the EU level. So big kudos to Primes and all of the people modeling the transition scenarios. That's been immensely helpful across all sectors just to get the big picture right.
Thank you very much. All well noted. Thank you also very much for the first point, Elena. We would like to use this as a quote. Now, let's go to the private side for a second here. Martin, I'm not asking about space-based solar yet, but I'm asking about your perspective working with utilities. You're working with innovators, working with incumbent industry that's trying to decarbonize. Looking at this from a bird's eye perspective, knowing we have to scale these technologies, what works and what doesn't work yet? What would you like to see? What shall improve from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I take the bird's eye view first, the hint. Thank you very much for that. If you take a bird's eye on COP, everyone sees the blue zone and the green zone. That's a fair perspective, and it's apparently on every map here. There's also another perspective, I believe, and I would phrase it as there's the first 50% and the second 50%. And the first 50% of decarbonization, we need to push for action. We need to stop procrastinate. We need to do all these things. We need to apply what we know already. We need to stop finding excuses. And actually, we do know what needs to be done. There are all the questions about how to scale, how to make it profitable, how to include the private sector, how to enable utilities, developers, and so forth. That comes into play. Here on that panel, I believe it's super, super interesting and super relevant because we are talking about the second 50% of decarbonization. That is tough. That is not scalable yet. That is, you nicely did show it before, in the midst of the valley of death, potentially. And we need like interconnected, as it was nicely pointed out, really interconnected and systemic views in order to thrive that and to push and navigate the high impact innovations for day after tomorrow now, because the second 50% of the journey, this is going to be the tough one. The marginal utilization of a solar panel on Earth installed next to another solar panel will be diminishing, and we need to find better answers, and those have to be found today. And I think it was already reflected. It's quite improbable from my perspective that only one person, only one sector, only one ministry, only one country, only one player will find it. It has to emerge in the best possible sense from an ecosystem, and everything that we can do to foster these ecosystems is super valuable especially for the second 50%.
This is almost a philosophical view on that. Great. Let's go back. Let's go to Earth now. And I'm not talking about space-based solar or Earth solar, but I'm talking about what's working, because you're also working with the public sector. What's working in ministries? We've heard a couple of steps that have worked well in Romania. We've heard lessons learned from the EU, basically from the Commission. What else do you see, especially at the interface between the public sector and industry that's developing, or innovators who are scaling their technologies?
What I'm observing is that the incumbent players in the, let's say, old industries, they are moving, they are transforming to a surprising level from my perspective. If you look at large utilities like Ørsted and so forth, and if you reconcile the transformation journey they have done over the past years in context of their larger company history, I think that's quite remarkable. Just naming them as one of many, I think there's a lot of progress. I just saw last night a lot of presentations about the tokenization of waste, of the waste industry. Also, if you reconcile where these companies are coming from a very, let's say, top-down oriented to a bottom-up orientation, from non-technology to heavy technology, I think there's movement going on. It's questionable if it's fast enough or not. It's also questionable if always the incumbent players are the best one to push progress forward. Not necessarily. That is also very clear. But I think there has been a lot of movement.
Okay, Sun Young, do you see this? In your work with more earlier stage technologies, developing countries as well? Do you see? How is the curve developing? How is the adoption of these technologies evolving? Is the progress fast enough? What would make it better?
I think the progress can always be faster, and that's what we are working towards. Maybe I can piggyback on what Martin has mentioned about the incumbent industries. So maybe this is my personal perspective. Maybe I can say this is Renewables experience. I think if the older industries or the incumbent industries can articulate the challenge that they're facing to decarbonize or to meet these policy targets that the government are setting, I think that's also a very clear signal to the innovators. What are the potential customers? What are their potential investors? So at least from UNIDO perspective, we're trying to push so we're trying to basically lobby the industries to look at the problem and have the solution from that perspective as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I was thinking about as Martin was sharing his experience.
Get it. Thank you. I would like to come now to the technology level a little bit, which is one thing is space-based solar. We'll hear about it, and we'll also throw on the presentation so you can see it here with some slides. But before we come to this very far-out technology, I would like to give you some examples of what innovators need, because we're working with innovators. We had two confirmed for today who unfortunately either didn't make it into the blue zone or had to cancel the trip. But we speak to them a lot, we work with them. And I'll give you one or two examples of what is helping them get off the ground. Let's look at geothermal. We discussed geothermal. Key part here, if we speak to companies that develop geothermal, is the drilling risk. So of course, you need to do test drillings, especially if you go very deep in geothermal energy. And this drilling is incredibly expensive. And it takes a high financial commitment to do these drillings. So something very, very specific governments, for example, can do, and I see a hand raised there already, is cover that risk or sort of hedge the risk and do not put these whole companies and their development at risk for one specific step in their development. And Johanna, I can see you want to mention something on this, and then I'd like to discuss with all of you a little bit on what governments can specifically do.
Yes, great point on geothermal. This is one of the really nice examples of the projects that we fund with the Innovation Fund. It's actually the fund only exists since 2020. This is the first project that has reached entry into operation under the fund. It's a geothermal project in Germany called Everloop. So they are doing closed loop geothermal, which is innovative as such, but it was exactly that story. The drilling is so risky that no bank will give you pre-financing without knowing whether the drilling will be successful. So these companies have to raise either a huge amount of equity that's really expensive, or they have to get a mezzanine grant. And what we did here is we made sure that they will only get as much money as they need to do the successful drill proofs. But then afterwards, this company financed itself with private funding. So we really just took this construction drilling risk out, and the rest of it worked with private financing.
Other comments on this? Elena, you want to add a perspective from Romania? Maybe we've discussed geothermal briefly.
Yes, just very, very briefly. I think, you know, we do have very ambitious targets, right? I was mentioning by 2050, and Romania is actually blessed with very rich biodiversity, and today our energy mix is quite diversified. But going ahead, moving out of coal, and we do have legally binding targets for that, we do have to replace that capacity with something, right? And for now, we have our targets are indeed with more mature technologies, mature renewables in that sense. Some may still call them innovative and alternative, but I think we can take that solar and wind are mature renewables. We also have potential. We know there is potential, geothermal potential, especially in the western part of the country, and it really depends at this stage, if you ask me, it really depends on at the local communities. So we know there's a very active local municipality that is looking into this. We also know there's a small town running on district heating, fully on geothermal. So this is just one example. But what we also managed in the past, in the recent period, is that there is a strategy, an R&D strategy, which has climate, energy, and mobility as a pillar. So I hope that with this sort of policy incentives and with this sort of pilots project that we're seeing, and with the knowledge that there is potential, that this will speed up soon enough. But of course, there's yet studies to be made, the potential to be understood, the risk to be evaluated, and so on and so forth. But there's another innovative technology I may add, if if that, from your perspective, that's innovative, and that's offshore wind. Wave would be also one, not tidal though, but there is potential because Romania also has access to the Black Sea. So I think given a country like Romania where the biodiversity is so rich, I think we can look at more technologies. At this point, these are not in the main strategies, but again, there's space, there's policy space, and the regulatory details have yet to be defined.
We're reserving some minutes to look into space before this, because what we're trying to do is basically take the lessons learned at the European level with the 5% quota, with other kind of innovative policy elements, and make them available after this panel as well, because we always receive interest on that. I would like to ask, and we've heard from Johanna already and Elena just now, what would you wish for? It could be one agenda point, it could be 2 or 3. So what would you wish for to give these types of flexibility tools, innovative types of technologies a better chance? We've heard a very specific step just now from Johanna and from Elena as well, but if I can hear from all of you, really short statement please. What would you wish for to drive things faster? Martin, can you start, please?
I'm saying that being a male, I wish that we would think much more connected than we actually do, and I wish that we would think much more, let's say, what's right in the long term, rather than being driven by quarterly, let's say, progress for capital markets, rather than legislational periods. What stick with me very much is what Johanna said about the other delegation, to really have a council that is, so to speak, giving advice on the long run, what's right on the long run, and how can we execute that despite all the frictions that are hitting us on a timely basis in between, and really think much more connected, as males usually don't do. This is why I said that. And think much more connected between ecosystems. I think that is, from my perspective, key.
Over to Sun Yang.
Yes,
thank you, Martin.
Thank you. I think my thoughts are actually quite similar. I talked about ecosystem linkages earlier, because I think there's a lot of good initiative already happening in different pockets in the ecosystem. So if a ferry were to come to me and ask, is this the ferry question?
This is the ferry question,
If the ferry were to come to me, I think I would ask for a, what do you call it? Like when you're on a ship and you're like a navigator or a compass. And if a person has a question, how do I solve this clean tech market-related question, that there would be a compass that points to go to this ecosystem player, actor, and that is the person responsible for this type of, accountable to resolve this issue. So I think, at least from the experience that we have as UNIDO, this is the challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs face, but also it's a frustration that a lot of government officials have as well, because in some countries, these interministerial panels are very well connected. In other countries, they exist, but they may not be as well connected. So something that can facilitate the navigation and the connection better, I think that would be really great.
Thank you. Elena, more thoughts to add?
Yes. I think as we move ahead, and we know that there's funding available, I think we know about the modernization fund for the coal phase out. There's the innovation fund. There are various funds available. But moving forward, we know we have also to make sure that everyone is on board. We don't leave really no one behind. And in that sense, the social climate fund will be available soon for us. So we need to figure that out as well. How we help the most vulnerable businesses and the most vulnerable citizens. And here for the ferry, I would have the vision about heating, especially heating. Cooling is less of a problem in Romania for now, though with climate change that's changing. So how do we help people that need the most support in terms of heating, especially those that rely on biomass? So here the thing is really about that and transport, but also the interlinkage, I think the nexus. Here there's space to do more in the sense that we will decarbonize transport. It will be a hard challenge, but how do we make sure that does not put pressure on the power sector? So this is the one nexus, and the second nexus would be between the power sector and the digital space. So in that sense, in Romania, we do have, in the past year at least, a lot of uptake of solar PV. So this puts pressure on the grid. So we do have almost 100,000 prosumers. And the question is, how do we make sure that green and digital, because we do good and green in digital, but this nexus would be great to have, to have more conversations around the intersection of both. Thank you.
Johanna, final thoughts here.
This is going to be a slightly long-winded answer because I need to elaborate a little bit what I mean. So I think there's a fine balance between regular renewables that we've got down the cost curve very far and they're very cheap to deploy, and that's great. And I think we don't need investment in innovation just to have something different. So we should talk about why do we want to invest in innovative renewables. And I think there's two good reasons for it. One is to get the load factors up, so make them more efficient. And the other one is to get a different generation profile because solar or wind are highly correlated. So you have that intermittency problem. So I think I would like to focus on innovation in renewables that really solves one of these two problems, higher load factor or better smoothing of the profile. And my wish for the ferry in that sense would be well-functioning power markets design everywhere and maybe nodal pricing, so you actually have an incentive for investing in better renewables profiles and smoothing out the intermittency, as opposed to just, I don't want to say investing in nutcase technologies, but we don't need innovation for innovation's sake. We need innovation to solve very specific problems with renewables.
Great, all noted. Now, this is a good example, because what Johanna is mentioning, of course, it only makes sense to invest in something that's creating value. But sometimes we need the far-out ideas. I mean, think of, some of you might still remember the 2000s or maybe the late 1990s or so, all the opposition that came everywhere against solar power, for example. We had, in Germany, for example, campaigns paid for by the big utilities, especially the lignite burning and producing utilities. Forget it, it's never going to work. I mean, so some of the things sound very far out in the first place. And I'd like to take you, or I'd like to ask Martin to take you to space for a second. This is a very far out technology. Martin has collaborated with the European Space Agency for a long time on this. Please give us an overview, and I have to click forward as well on this. Give us an overview of what this is and how this maybe could work.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Maybe before I even start explaining it, coming back to interconnectiveness and coming back to load factor and shapes. The way I try to look at things is, if I look at a system, I try to identify what are the elements and what are the vectors that are moving along. And then I tried to take a look, what are the deeper rules that define the output of the system in order to make a quantum leap? Because otherwise you just adjust the system a bit and you change the output marginally. But if you go to the deeper rules, to the deeper paradigms, if that makes sense, then you can make the quantum leap. So sounds very abstract. What I mean is like talking really about basic stuff like, what is generally recognized? Generally recognized is generation of electricity takes place somewhere. Okay, good, somewhere on Earth. Transmission of energy is being done by cables and pipes and tanks. Okay, good. And what's also generally recognized is that decarbonization is a national task. I mean, if we look at COP, it's the structure we have chosen to resolve the problem is on a country level. So these are generally recognized things. Now, if you shake up these paradigms, there might be value in it. And I was not smart enough to do this myself. So we looked around and we thought, who's interconnectiveness, who's in a best possible position to shake up these paradigms? And we came to, it's a space agency. Because in space, it's very clear you go very close to you are very close to the source. There, the dream of every PV engineer becomes true, and the dream is get close to 1,365 kilowatt, not kilowatt hour, kilowatt on the square meter. That's the solar constant. Sun is there all the time, 24/7, 365. There are some eclipses and so forth, okay? But it's there all the time. So instead of increasing efficiency down here, it's about going closer to where it actually comes from. So that's a quantum leap. The next thing is, for a space agency, it's super normal not to think in cables and pipes. Because it's a very complex construct for them. What's easy for us down on Earth, for them it's super complicated. And for them, looking from space down to Earth, national borders are a very abstract construct. So to cut a long story in short, this is not a conceptual paper. You can go online and find it under Space by Solar Power. There are prototypes in place. Maybe we could just go back one slide, and I would just stick to that slide. So how it works is you collect the photons from the sun. You reflect the sun. There's 10 times more sun than down here. You reflect them on reflectors that you can condense it by the factor of 3. Then you reflect them on, let's say, conventional space-proofed PV panels, convert the photons into electrons. Then you convert the electrons into microwaves. That's basically the same process that you're doing in your microwave. And then you send the microwaves down to Earth. And one would intuitively think, oh, okay, and then I lose all the energy, right? And actually, since microwaves are not interacting much with what they meet, because the bandwidth of the frequency is so large. This is why you can actually use a microwave in your kitchen, and it's not dangerous. It's a bit different with a laser. So you don't laser your food in a microwave. You use microwaves. And then you collect the microwaves on Earth with a very simple structure. It's a diapolic antenna. It's the same structure that you used to have on your house roofs for analogous television. So it's a very simple thing. It's basically a mesh of grid, and then you feed it back into the system.
I have a question.
Yes.
Great, thank you for this overview. Now, if you were to again zoom out and minding what we just discussed, how far is it? Because obviously this has a high risk of not becoming a relevant technology even in 50 years or so. But take the positive stance, and maybe you sort of zoom out and think, what does this tell us? Where is it right now, and what does this tell us about developing these kinds of technologies in a way, as Johanna has pointed out, that makes sense in the end and create value?
Yeah.
And please mind, we have 2 more minutes. Alex is sitting here, he'll throw us out.
Excellent. So I'll make it very quick, maybe 2-3 points. First is, it's really not, it's early stage, but still not very conceptual anymore, in that sense that all the space agencies are working on it for quite a long time. The only thing is, it was just never profitable due to the high launching costs. And also something very interesting that I have encountered, my brain is full of electrons and molecules. If I talk to space people, they don't even care. They think in kilograms. So for them, the decisive number is how much is the weight, because the weight defines the costs, because it defines the number of launches. So this has come down significantly. Second thing is, since they all have been working on it for quite some time, the first prototypes I have seen on Earth for the transmission, it's very impressive. Besides that, you don't see anything, but it's working. And then the US has launched a first prototype now, so it's really tangible. And the beauty of that thing is, it's not, how shall I put it? It's not very complicated in that sense that the single components are unclear, like compared to fusion, for example. Here, it's much more the challenge to scale that installation in space. Mm-hmm. That is the challenge. So prototype is there, scaling is the next challenge, and recognition by the institutions that this could be a very valuable addition for the second 50% of the energy transition.
Maybe in the second half of the century as well. We will see.
Honestly, hopefully beforehand, I would count on the 2030s to see the first installation.
That's a bold statement. Now, I'm wrapping up in 20 seconds, Alex. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here. We'd like to invite you for further discussions next year at the Future Cleantech Festival, the ARC. There's, as many of you have been there, there's a second session this afternoon at 2 p.m. here in the Global Innovation Hub again on global RD&D priorities together with UN Climate Change Tech Team. Please give these panelists a warm applause for turning up early in the morning here and competing with the sound from the other unit next door. Thank you all for being here, and now it's another interesting session, and Alex will say more on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that's great. I would love to connect with you. I'm super interested in that technology. Oh, yes, please do. Actually.